Tonight we can report there are now 3,000 federal agents in Minneapolis. Are they patrolling? Are they occupying? Are they escalating? That is one of the big questions facing this show of force by the Trump administration. I'll remind you that Minneapolis is a smaller city, one of those cities where you've heard the name. It has a big brand name, but did you know it's only about 430,000 people there? So this show of force alone means it's one officer for every 140 residents at a time where whatever is happening in the street has been a response to the ongoing public demonstrations. It's a high rate of federal oversight. Recent violence has come from Trump's federal government on some days, not from the streets that the agents say they are patrolling or protecting. This is your country right now. People ask, when will the crisis hit? When is the constitutional crisis? What are we going to do? Was it Jimmy Kimmel? Was it indicting this or that person? Was it shooting this woman to death? Or is it this militarized situation? Many are sounding the alarm.
Overnight, violent crashes between federal agents and protesters in Minneapolis.
President Trump is threatening to send federal troops to Minnesota.
The air here is so tense and heavy.
In Minnesota, another shooting by an ICE agent just 1 week after the death of Renee Good.
ICE roaming. There's 2,500 agents, maybe more, here in Minneapolis.
Crowds of protesters gathered at the scene. As you see here, ICE tried to keep them at bay with tear gas and pepper spray.
However bad the news is making you think Minneapolis is right now, it's worse.
That's just a sampling of what you can get from the ground. There are protesters, though, there and around the country who are clearly not going to be intimidated. And that's not rhetoric. When American citizens, when a mother of three is summarily executed and shot in the face, and everyone knows about it in that town for sure, the next wave of protests, of people walking, as with other protests throughout the rich history of this country, bad and good, tough and easy, it involves people knowing there is some risk they face, and they're standing up anyway. Now, Trump is now responding by repeating a threat he has made before, saying maybe he would invoke the Insurrection Act. I'll remind everyone that hasn't been used, the direct consent and collaboration of a sitting governor in the state where it would be deployed, for over 60 years. Now, under law, when invoked properly, it does give a president extra emergency powers. In this case, it would be to do what Trump has been partly stopped from doing elsewhere, deploying the military inside the United States to patrol you, the American people, taxpayers, paying to have the military walk around like we're some other type of country for potentially even longer periods. As for the current governor of that state, who is not interested in consenting to any collaborative such deployment, here is Governor Walz.
Donald Trump wants this chaos. He wants confusion. And yes, he wants more violence on our streets. We cannot give him what he wants. We must protest loudly, urgently, but also peacefully. That's what the sitting governor is saying. And remember, that sitting governor happens to, of course, be part of the ticket that lost to Donald Trump. And so, faced with the federal government killing people and then lying about it and saying it's okay, faced with a political movement on the right that not every Republican and not every Republican member of Congress, but many claiming these powers and telling everyone to shut up and sit down, what is the opposition? The opposition, both politically, because as I mentioned, they lost in 24. I need to start pre-spinning my expected loss.
I also think talking about canceling elections is trying to get people's eye off what he can do. As you said, it's not up to the president to decide whether we have an election. But what he can do is bring a lot of pressure to bear on local and state officials who have taken those offices since 2020. Because the Republican Party was more assured of their loyalty in case of accusations of cheating or of rigging or some sort of shenanigans in the election. So my worry, and the Atlantic has reported on this as of others, is that there will be a whole lot of measures. It won't be a cancellation. It's not going to be dramatic like that, but just a lot of measures, whether it's challenging voters, whether it's voting laws that are changed at the last minute, whether it's canceling mail-in, or whether it's the actions of local and state officials that are just going to create confusion And there's going to be a sense of uncertainty as to who won in Arizona, who won in Wisconsin.
Well, but he seems to think that it's likely that even with that they're going to lose.
I think he is not going to. He's not to lower the expectations. That's sort of traditional politics. I don't see Trump as playing the game of let's see if we can lower expectations so I can later claim we only lost 7 seats.
Do you have a different theory for why he says there's something deep psychologically with the voters? They always seem to lose the midterms.
I see him just thinking out loud, as he often does, and say, oh, yeah, I've noticed that we always lose the midterms, which everyone knows, but he's kind of just discovered it and he's thinking out loud. But what I'm more worried about, as I said, is a more concerted campaign that's nationwide, and that is, some of his, more disciplined advisors will be implementing it to just create confusion about the election.
And in Minneapolis, protesters were in the streets late into the night after another shooting by a federal agent. The Department of Homeland Security claims the agent shot an undocumented immigrant from Venezuela following what they say was a targeted traffic stop. DHS says the agent was running after the migrant when he was attacked by 2 other people from a nearby apartment who, along with the migrant, hit the officer with a snow shovel and a broom handle. According to the DHS, this is their account, the agent feared for his life and fired shots, hitting the migrant in the leg. The agent and the migrant were taken to a local hospital. And just moments ago, President Trump weighed in, threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act unless, as he put it, the corrupt politicians in Minnesota don't obey the law and stop the professional agitators and insurrectionists from attacking the patriots of ICE. And Mika, this was certainly a marked escalation. Invoking the Insurrection Act would allow him to mobilize far more federal assets and troops.
Let's go right to what's happening on the ground. Joining us live from Minneapolis, MS Now reporter Nnamdi Igwanwu. Nnamdi, describe, first of all, the overnight clashes.
Mika, you can still see just evidence of the clash, and the sun is starting to come out here, and you can see more clearly just how intense things got. All of these white marks, just some pepper balls, remnants of the pepper balls that were used by federal agents as they tried to keep the crowd yesterday in control. I can tell you, being here now, several hours later, you can almost still taste the tear gas in the air. There have been several times that we have had to kind of take a break and go to a different area because there was just so much used that it is still pungent in this air. But the clashes yesterday, a result of tensions that have been simmering all week since we've been here, that boiled over after another shooting, ICE-linked shooting of an immigrant they were trying to apprehend. Overnight for hours, we saw federal law enforcement work to control dozens of very, very angry, very upset protesters who responded in kind with throwing things like fireworks and other objects at the federal agents, who then responded with the use of pepper spray, pepper bullets, a ton of tear gas, and what are called bullet balls that essentially, when you throw them, they create a flash, an explosion, and send rubber pellets everywhere. We were here on the ground yesterday for hours, and there were several moments where we had to go hide for cover just because things were getting very, very volatile. There have been warnings from Governor Walz all week since the death of Renee Nicole Good last week that protests have to remain peaceful for fear of any sort of violent escalation, potentially inciting more of a federal presence here. And we know the president this morning suggesting that that is something that could be possible. It's something that Mayor Frey has been very, very conscious of and been warning people, protesters, with a clear message, essentially saying, look, if you want to advocate for the undocumented immigrants here and advocate against what ICE is doing, there are ways to do that. You can do the noise demonstrations we've seen where people protest downtown outside of hotels they believe ICE agents are, but those protests nonviolent. You can go to the Whipple building, which has served as the de facto headquarters for ICE, and continue to protest there. But the kind of violence we saw yesterday, he warned, it could result in even more of a federal presence here. And I have to tell you, if there's anything that I think would set off protesters even more or upset residents even more, and we've spoken to dozens upon dozens since we've been here, it would be more agents coming here, especially if those agents are militarized and coming in the wake of any sort of Insurrection Act declaration by the president.
MS Now reporter Nnamdi Igwanwu live from Minneapolis. Thank you very much. And with us, we have former U.S. Senator and MS Now political analyst Claire McCaskill, politics bureau chief and senior political columnist at Politico, Jonathan Martin. Good to have you both. Claire, I want to start with you, especially with your experience as senator, bringing it to the table here. The president threatening.
Powers exist in many legal systems as safeguards for extreme circumstances. They are designed to provide additional tools when ordinary processes are no longer sufficient to maintain stability or protect essential functions. Because of their potential impact, these powers are usually defined narrowly and applied sparingly. Let's begin by understanding why emergency powers were created. In most systems, authority is divided between local and national levels. Local authorities manage day-to-day conditions, while national authorities provide support when challenges exceed local capacity. Emergency powers bridge the gap between these levels, allowing temporary coordination when standard mechanisms fail. Historically, emergency powers were introduced to address rare and severe situations. These might include widespread breakdowns in public order, inability of local systems to function, or threats that disrupt essential services. In such cases, ordinary responses may be insufficient. However, the existence of emergency powers does not mean they are used frequently. In fact, history shows that these authorities are typically invoked only after other options have been exhausted. This cautious approach reflects awareness of the broad consequences such measures can have. One important principle in the use of emergency authority is necessity. Necessity means that the situation cannot be addressed effectively through normal means. Before emergency powers are considered, institutions usually assess whether existing resources, coordination, and communication can resolve the issue. Closely related is the principle of proportionality. Proportionality ensures that responses match the scale of the challenge. Even during emergencies, actions are expected to be limited to what is required, avoiding unnecessary expansion or escalation. Another guiding concept is subsidiarity. This principle emphasizes that issues should be handled at the most local level capable of addressing them. National involvement typically occurs only when local systems request assistance or demonstrate clear inability to manage conditions independently. Historically, many emergency interventions followed this pattern. Local authorities identified challenges, sought additional support, and coordinated responses with higher levels. This process respected local knowledge while providing broader resources. There have also been rare cases where national authorities acted without local requests. In these situations, the stated purpose was often to protect individuals or restore essential functions when local protections were insufficient. Such actions were controversial and closely scrutinized, reflecting sensitivity to balance and oversight. The most extreme uses of emergency authority occurred during periods of large-scale internal conflict. During these moments, normal governance structures were disrupted, requiring extraordinary measures to preserve continuity. These cases are generally viewed as exceptions rather than models for routine response. Because of this history, modern institutions emphasize restraint. Restraint does not mean inaction. It means deliberate evaluation, clear justification, and limited scope. Emergency authority is considered a last resort, not a first response. Timing also matters. Invoking emergency measures too early can escalate tension rather than resolve it. Acting too late can allow conditions to worsen. Effective decision-making requires careful assessment of both immediate needs and long-term consequences. This is why oversight mechanisms are important. Emergency powers are typically accompanied by review processes, time limits, or reporting requirements. These safeguards help ensure that extraordinary authority does not become normalized. Transparency plays a role as well. Clear explanation of why measures are taken, what they involve, and how long they are expected to last supports public understanding. Transparency reduces speculation and helps maintain trust during uncertain periods. Another important aspect is institutional memory. Past experiences inform present decisions. Historical examples of both successful and problematic interventions shape how current leaders approach emergency authority. Lessons learned over time reinforce caution and clarity. Public perception is also a factor. How emergency measures are understood by the public influences their effectiveness. Measures perceived as excessive or unclear may generate resistance, while those viewed as necessary and limited are more likely to gain acceptance. This highlights the importance of communication. Effective communication explains not only what is happening, but why. It acknowledges concerns, outlines safeguards, and emphasizes temporary intent. This approach supports cooperation rather than fear. Emergency authority is most effective when integrated into a broader strategy. Such a strategy includes dialogue, coordination, and gradual escalation if needed. Emergency measures alone rarely resolve underlying issues. They are tools to stabilize conditions, not permanent solutions. Long-term stability depends on restoring ordinary processes. Once conditions improve, emergency authority is typically withdrawn. Returning responsibility to standard systems reinforces normal governance and reduces dependence on extraordinary measures. This transition is an important part of legitimacy. Ending emergency authority when conditions allow demonstrates respect for institutional boundaries and reinforces trust in the system. Over time, societies refine how emergency powers are used. Legal frameworks evolve, oversight improves, and expectations become clearer. These refinements reflect ongoing effort to balance flexibility with accountability. Another key lesson from history is that context matters. The same measure may have different implications depending on circumstances. What is appropriate in one situation may be unnecessary or harmful in another. This reinforces the need for case-by-case evaluation. Emergency authority also interacts with ethical considerations. Decisions affect real people, communities, and institutions. Weighing safety, rights, and